All right, I'm Lee. I'm a sociolinguist and a linguistic anthropologist, and I work at Monash Uni. So I'm at Monash. I'm in the process of a PhD. I'm looking at the kinds of decisions that Australians make about each other based on the way they talk.
Okay.
So I specialise in Australian English. So there is the kind of meaning that we have that's the definition of a word or the definition of the use of a particular grammatical structure. And then there's this other set of meanings that we call social meanings or indexical meanings. And those are the ones that don't change the meaning of what's being said, but they give us more information about the speaker and who the speaker is. And sometimes those are things that we do deliberately because we want to highlight elements of ourselves or because we want to help create an identity that's based in a particular thing. But sometimes we also read those things in other people where they're not intended. And sometimes that's where that can lead us down a worse path, particularly if we're trying to communicate with people and if we're trying to talk about ideas.
How does language or the use of language reinforce tribalism or biases or social bubbles?
Okay. So a lot of these interpretations that we give to language, to the social meanings of language, they're based in power. They're based in who in society has power, who has status, who has money, who has prestige, and the way that they speak tends to become considered the default way to speak or the correct way to speak. And so then you find that when people are being sort of punished socially for not talking in the right way, they're actually being punished for not sounding exactly like these default humans who tend to fall in a specific set of social categories. So yes, you get a very much an us and them, particularly among people who would consider themselves intelligent perhaps, because it's a very easy way to dismiss someone, is to go, okay, well you used wrong grammar. You didn't say this right, therefore I don't have to listen to you. It's obvious that you're not someone I have to pay attention to. You must not be intelligent. If you don't talk the way that these people with status talk, then you're obviously not smart enough and you're out of my league and off you go. Yeah, and I think that can be really damaging, particularly where as skeptics, I mean, we're here to engage with ideas. We're here to pull apart ideas and find the cracks in them and fill the cracks and look for evidence. And if we just decide that there's this whole group of people we're not going to listen to because they don't sound the way we want them to sound, we've just locked ourselves out of half the conversation.
Scientists may come across as elite, skeptics may come across as elite, but if what we really want to do is help people improve their critical thinking, but we're alienating them at the same time, is that the right message? How can we better use linguistics to I guess everybody's favour by helping them?
I mean, yeah, you're exactly right that this kind of thing, this skepticism, scientists, academics, there tends to be quite a bit of gatekeeping, and a lot of it seems to be around identity and how intelligent and knowledgeable we feel like we are, and sometimes that ends up being translated into the way we see language and the way that we choose to use language. And so you'll see a lot of academics, a lot of scientists who will use really complex language to talk about things in a way that you have to decode, that you have to have been trained how to decode by becoming an academic yourself. And I think that unnecessarily limits what we have to say. I think that if what we have to say is worth saying, we should be able to explain it to anybody at all. And that involves using simple language and direct language. And I don't think that means that we're dumbing down. I don't think that means that we're being unnecessarily simple. I think if you genuinely understand something, if you're a genuine expert on something, you'll be able to explain it in a way that anybody can understand. And that's an idea that gets a little bit of pushback. Yeah.
Sure, like it's in order for understanding to be propagated, the actual explanations have to be made intelligible. But to whom? Who are you trying to convince? I mean, academics can talk to each other in a sophisticated language which may be required for, understanding complex biology or mathematics. But in terms of, I don't know if I'm correct. I'm just my assumption. But like, in terms of general communication, it seems like there's this big. Have you heard of the Valley of Death, that they call it, like between the scientists trying to communicate with the public and the developers of the medicine?
Okay, no, I haven't, but can you tell me more?
Oh, okay. It's just a term that has been thrown about to describe the lack of being able to communicate between even like scientists want to talk want to explain to the captains of industry what they're doing, and then the captains of industry can act on the new scientific breakthroughs much more quickly if they understand what they're talking about. But there's a big lack of communication there. That's just an example. And this is not general community, but yeah.
So
I'm just thinking how to tie that in.
Yeah, I think...
It's an interesting segue, but might be distracting.
No, that's right. I think that part of the whole communicating our ideas thing is understanding that other people don't necessarily have the same goals as we do. So there are some, obviously I love language. I just want to know more about it for the sake of it. Even if it didn't do anybody else any good, I would still want to know all about it. But for example, you as a skeptic are asking me, how can I use what you know in order to achieve a particular goal? And so I need to be able to communicate to you that perhaps one way to do it is to use simple language when you talk about things. To don't try and use longer words because they make you sound smarter. Because I know that there's a lot of people who identify as skeptics also have a fair bit wrapped up in intelligence and knowledge, or their identity wrapped up in it. And using big words is one way that we can project that. And using complex English is one way that we can project that. But then the more complex our language is, the harder it's going to be for someone to understand. And so I think the fundamental thing is more that we stop thinking, when we choose our language, we stop thinking about it as how it reflects us and start thinking about what the person listening to us actually needs in order to get on board. And I think that's the distinction that people often miss.
It's interesting that some people have the I guess we all want to feel important. We all want to feel good about ourselves. And maybe part of what makes science or skepticism attractive is identifying with something intellectual. But on the other hand, most people involved in skepticism want to get other people involved at the same time. And these sort of conflicting, sort of personal needs.
Yeah, it's kind of, we want other people to come and join us, but we often don't know how to bridge the gap between the two. Yeah, and I think that can often lead to a fair bit of frustration.
It's all right. It's a lapel.
Okay.
Any suggestions you've got in a way people can communicate science as well, like science communicators in a way they might use language?
Okay. I suppose for starters, I'd say don't assume that people know what your jargon means. So I would start with what you consider common knowledge and then take another step simpler than that. Because the stuff that you take for granted is stuff that other people might not have. And if they don't have the absolute base understanding of the concepts you're talking about, they're not going to follow you all the way to the end of your argument.
That's true, yeah. All right, well, how do you think, how would you describe how language might have changed, if you agree that it has, in the internet environment and social media environments?
Okay, first up I'm going to give a shout out to a colleague of mine, Gretchen McCulloch, who has literally written the book on this. It's called Because Internet, and I really recommend it. But the way language adapts to the way that people want to use it, as a general rule. So there are all these different things that you can do with language now online or in, say, text messages or Facebook messages that you wouldn't necessarily do otherwise. For example, emoji or something like that. One really interesting thing I find is full stops, because I work with high school students sometimes, and one of the things I ask them is to take a bunch of text messages that just have the word yes with varying punctuation, and I get them to rank them for me in order of most polite to least polite. The least polite one is always yes with a full stop. Because for them, when you use a full stop in a text, that means that you're angry, or that you're dismissive, or that you're upset with someone. And that's, obviously that's an age-graded difference as well. So I shouldn't say age-graded. It differs with age. That's me. There, I've caught myself in my own jargon. But younger generations do this really easily, and I think that can result in a fair bit of miscommunication. But that's something that's evolving now. So young people are the ones who are driving language change. Young people are the ones who are embracing these new technologies. So it makes sense that all this change might be happening in places like the internet.
What was the most polite way of saying yes?
All, from memory, all lowercase yes, and then a smiley. No punctuation.
Nice.
Yeah, and they had very strong feelings about it too. They could tell me exactly why. Yeah.
Cool. It's good to know that. I'm sure I'm not cottoned on to all these nuances.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. What are some examples, because you gave a few during your talk, what are some examples of where we may look down on somebody if they use the word use or whatever,
yep.
And how we should sort of think twice about, what we're doing if we catch ourselves?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I mentioned, let's go with use, because that seems to be quite well known among Australians or people who speak Australian English, that it's... People often will take someone who uses it and decide automatically that they're uneducated, or they're stupid, or they're from the wrong place. They didn't go to a fancy private school. Obviously, no one taught them the right way to do this. I mean, first up, we've got to dispense with the idea that there's a right way to use language. If the other person understood you, it did exactly what it had to do. That's it, that's the end. We've got these added social meanings that people will interpret into it, but if our focus is communication, just get it done. Don't look at these, don't get distracted by these nonsense details.
Well, you were talking before about prescriptive attitudes to the way people use language. In a sense, it might alienate them or make them feel like they shouldn't be saying anything or talking or having a say.
Yeah, exactly. So language is really closely bound up in identity, and sometimes it's consciously related to for people to the way they talk. Sometimes it's projected on them by others. But the people who tend to say use have probably already had people pick up on it, have probably already had people mock them for it. And so hearing something like that is probably going to make them really reticent to have anything to say. And I think it's not at all logical or reasonable to assume that education correlates with intelligence. I think that anyone can have a good point to make, and I think we owe it to people to listen to them and see what they have to say. Just because perhaps they might not know what I mean when I say age grading doesn't mean that they're not capable of understanding that there are differences, like the people of different ages use language differently. It's just that I didn't frame it the right way. So I think as a general rule, my principle is that if you didn't understand me, it's not because there's something wrong with you, it's because I haven't explained it the right way yet. It's on me to get that through to you. It's not on you to try and decipher what I have to say. And I think that's a really important point to remember when we're interacting with people. If our ideas are good enough, if our position is convincing enough, it'll sell itself, no matter what kind of language we frame it in.
Nice, yeah. What's that? You said there was some sort of, people aren't actually trying to correct somebody. Are they trying to signal their status or something? I don't forget exactly what you said.
This comes into the whole thing of people considering particular varieties of English to be more intelligent or more educated, and that when somebody doesn't use that variety, when they use a different variety, it can provide us, the people who want to gatekeep, it can provide us with an opportunity to shut them down. So obviously by the fact that you've just used the word use, that means I don't have to listen to you. That means you're not someone who's worth listening to. You must be stupid. You must be uneducated. Obviously, you have no ideas that are worth me engaging with. And that part is really untrue, but it's also a bit common in arguments, particularly on the internet, when you seem to be losing. Someone will come back from the tail end of an argument and go, "Aha, you said use," or something like that. So we're done. Or they'll just do rather than saying you got it wrong and I don't have to listen to you, they'll just correct them. I think you meant this, the end. And that's considered to be, I've won the argument, I've asserted my superiority. And I don't think there's any reason to associate it with superiority. It's just a language form.
Yeah, it's just like a stop thinking here. We don't need to really understand the arguments.
Yeah, exactly.
Anymore. We just need to shut the other person down. It's like,
yeah. So it's kind of the people that we would have considered writing off anyway. Their language gives us an easy vehicle to do it. basically. So as a general rule, the kinds of decisions we make about language, they're never about language. They're always about the people. But language gives us a bit of a fig leaf to hide it behind.
Yeah, interesting. Good metaphor, actually. And I was thinking before, it's kind of like we have our arguments, and we're using things like linguistic correction as like just another soldier to go to war against the other person's argument without actually understanding their argument. You just have to appear right at the end of the day.
It's just we've got to separate people's ideas from the way they express them. And that's on us. If we're about getting to the bottom of ideas, then it's on us to actually do that analysis and pull it apart. Yes, so the purpose of language is for communication. It's for communicating ideas. So if you understood somebody well enough to correct their grammar, then they never needed your help in the first place.
I like that.
That's it.
Are you aware of Wittgenstein? Where he said, I don't know if this is related, but it just pops in my mind. Language is its use, in a sense. There's no real sort of language out there. There's no natural sort of universal sort of blueprint. It's just how it's used.
So there's no Platonic ideal. That fits in perfectly with the way I look at things, because language, touching my face. Language it's a social phenomenon. That's what it's for. It's for interacting with people. We learn it by being socialized into it rather than being taught it expressly. Just if you've got no one to talk to, what's the point of language?
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much.
That's right.